theory, I should be able to just download the recording and then I can like chop bits off.
Look at us in our like almost matching jumpers. You've gone live.
I know. I just realised. I was like, I just feel like I've made the worst jumper change choice.
Shall I take? Hang on, I've got this. Hang on.
Flashing geometrics.
Oh gosh, yeah, we're going to have to definitely stop this.
Now you look like a
No, we don't look funny. So, hello and welcome back to LinkedIn Lives. We are continuing our series on sustainable growth. Before Christmas, we spoke to some incredible founders and experts talking through how to plan everything from your culture to your OKRs to how to build a community and what does SEO really mean. What we're now looking at today is content repurposing. And when we looked at who we should talk to, actually the person that knows more about this than anybody else I know is Ness. So we are interviewing Scale Up is interviewing Scale Up today.
Resident expert.
And it's just, you know, why is content repurposing so important? I think we'll talk through this and we've got some great examples to go through. But really it's because still there's this imbalance where people spend hours creating masterpiece pieces of content but not enough time promoting it, and it just doesn't go far enough. And in the days where we all need to be efficient and we all need to be effective with our time, teams are small and need to be punching above their weight, we should really be thinking about how we can create fewer pieces of content that we can repurpose and go further. Now, a lot of people ask us about repurposing because it all sounds really nice, but then they get a bit nervous when they think it means video editing. So we can talk through exactly what that means and how you can reuse, recycle, repurpose content and how to be really smart about it. So just to kick us off then, Ness, what exactly do we mean by content repurposing?
Yeah, good question and a great place to start, because I feel like I have this conversation so often with so many of the teams that we work with and other kind of fellow peers and marketers, because content repurposing, I think for a lot of people means basically taking one piece of content and just putting it in lots of places. And actually it's much more strategic than that. And fundamentally it's about, really, I think at the heart of it, it's more about distribution of content and the concept that, you know, you invest so much time and energy in creating something genuinely useful, genuinely valuable for your audience. You can't just post it once and hope for the best, you know, whether that's a great LinkedIn article or whether it's a webinar or an interview that you run. It's really about thinking, okay, now that we've created that, or in the planning of creating it, thinking about how can we distribute this as far and wide as possible to get maximum reach and value from it. And part of that process means you've got to think about what are the different platforms we're going to share it on, and therefore what different formats does it need to then turn into. And so it becomes kind of this bigger thread of thought, which is not just simply taking one blog and copying and pasting it in different places, but thinking about how you expand your reach. So let me take an example to kind of hopefully explain that a little bit better, which is, you know, take a live webinar or an interview, you know, even like the ones that we do, right? And we originally planned to run them on LinkedIn as a live event. Lots of people do, quite a kind of common channel to start with. But rather than leave it there and kind of hope that it proliferates through the algorithm and reaches lots of people, we'll think about, okay, now that we've had that really meaty conversation, now that we've had that great conversation with an expert, how can we get that thinking in front of as many people as possible in the right places? And for me, that always starts with thinking critically about what are my key platforms, where do my audience spend their time consuming content, and how can I take that one individual piece and then proliferate it through those channels. So that might be, you take that live recording of a webinar or an interview and you might turn it into a YouTube video and go and upload that video onto YouTube. You might then create a transcript of that conversation and turn it into an SEO optimized blog for your website. You might take the audio only and put it onto podcast channels like Spotify or Apple, etc. And you might take some of the main discussion points or kind of key insights from that conversation and create 5 social media posts off the back of it. So, the emphasis for me really is on adaptation of content versus just simply reposting it. It's really thinking about what are my platforms, therefore the right formats, and how do you take that core bit of thinking and get it into all of those different places.
I think that's so spot on. And I think people often feel worried that they're just repetitive and they're just repeating themselves. And actually, with the thought that only about 5 to 7% of your audience actually see any LinkedIn post,
Exactly.
You need to be repetitive, and people don't remember. They might have read the same post the week before, but they probably don't remember. So you can write it again and make sure you're pulling out a different part, but always thinking about how you add value. But definitely there's so much you can get from one recording.
Yeah.
And why is it important for marketers? Like, why do we always talk about it? Why do we make sure it's in every strategy we write?
Yeah, I think fundamentally, I think it's always been the case, but I feel like it's more and more the case now that we're always having to or needing to do more and more with less, right? Like there's always so much pressure on resources and, making small, we believe that you can create really powerful teams from small teams. It's not always about number of people on the team. It's about how resourceful and efficient you can all be and the processes you put in place to make that happen. And this is just, for me, really at the heart of a lot of all marketing activity, right? Which is about trying to be as smart as possible about the work you choose to do and where you place your effort, and thinking about where you place that effort. Because like you say, we all spend ages creating these masterpieces that they never really see the light of day. And that's such a shame, right? Because there is so much great content out there, but often it's lost amongst a myriad of not great content because you kind of feel this need to churn. And actually, I think there's a real focus on like resource efficiency, like how can we use our minimal amount of resources as powerfully as possible, and how can we really maximize the ROI of our time. And no marketing team needs hundreds and thousands of great ideas to build their strategies off. They just need a few well executed. And I think that's really at what the heart of this is all about, which is spend time really thinking about how to create really good, valuable insights and information you can share, and then find lots of great ways to share that rather than repeating the finding the good stuff part.
Yeah, definitely. And it's become so much easier now, hasn't it? Before, now we can use a tool to take to get the transcript, and a tool to give us our ideas of what could make a good social post. And and that's where I think we can use the AI tools really well, because we're using the great content that's already happened in the video or in the white paper or whatever you've created, and then using the tools to shorten that and repurpose it. And I think that's saving us such a lot of time now.
Yeah, totally. And actually, just to go back to your earlier point that you made at the beginning, which I think is a really important one, and I want to reiterate here, which is a part of our role I see as marketers is about finding that consistency in messaging, right? Like if we're trying to cut through and trying to become known for something and get that really clear for people, we have to repeat it. That doesn't mean literally repeating it word for word all the time and only doing that, but it does mean about consistency in the types of things we talk about and the way we talk about them and the opinions we hold on certain subjects and within our industries and things. And I think this process helps create good behaviors around that. So rather than trying to talk about and think of 20 different things to talk about, it forces you to stay on topic, but be creative in how you deliver that message. And another good kind of subset of that is it encourages experimentation, right? Because it forces you to try new channels, try new platforms without the effort of having to create bespoke content every time, but taking what you've already got and testing it in a new channel to see if you can, find meaningful growth in there.
Yeah, brilliant. And what are some of the common mistakes that people do? Like where does it go wrong, and where should we make sure that we're not sort of sending up people down a wrong path?
Yeah. I think again, this comes back to something I briefly touched on earlier, which is like this isn't simply a case of like duplicate posting. It's not about taking one blog you've written and finding 10 other blogs to post it on. It's not quite as literal as that. And I think sometimes that can be kind of where your mind first goes in terms of how literally can I like get more bang for my buck out of this thing. It's much more of a like strategic reuse of remanipulating things. And it isn't although it's designed to create efficiencies, I do think you've got to think about it not in like what's the easiest way to do this. It's not necessarily that no effort goes into it. You still have to put the effort and the thinking into how you reformat it for certain platforms and kind of formats so that it makes sense. But you know, it's just being thinking much more critically about what are the locations I should be trying, what other platforms, whether that's YouTube, podcasts, you know, offsite blogs, social media posts, whatever makes sense strategically for you and your audience, thinking about how you can manipulate different bits of content into formats for those things, and using that as a way to test some of those new channels. And the other thing, again, is like, back to this point of putting a bit of effort in, it's like sometimes different platforms call for a slightly different tone or different approach and things. And again, it's not always a literal copy and paste exercise. It might involve a little bit of rewriting or reformulating for it to make sense in different contexts. And so I think there's that side of it, which is just being really mindful of actually where are you now putting it and what do you need to do to make it make most sense in that context. And then the other two bits that I see that happen quite often are not updating out of date information. That's a real gotcha for this stuff, which is some content can age horribly, especially if you're kind of referencing current events or, you know, specific moments in time. And so it's, again, just one of those watch outs. If you're doing it properly, in that you're kind of thinking critically about what you're putting out there, you'll catch these things anyway. But again, it's that like, whilst doing it with speed, do it with care. And the other thing I always think as well is like, beyond just literally repurposing that bit of content I have for a different format, I always think, is there anything extra I can add to this now? I know what I know, because sometimes you might repurpose a bunch of things immediately and create them at the same time. You might come back to something a month later or 2 months later because it's topical again and you want to revisit that. And at that point, that's a good moment where you go, have things changed? Like, can we update our opinion here? Can we add something else? Is there a new discovery or learning we should add to this? And I think that's the other just like sense check, which is this still the very best it could be, or could we add more value to it?
Yeah, I think that's brilliant advice. Have you got a framework for approaching content repurposing? Like, how do we be really efficient? Because I think one problem that we see a lot is in teams is where, you know, marketing managers, especially when the sole marketing manager can spend a lot of time worrying about whether they're doing the right thing or thinking about how to do it. So do we have is there a framework that we can start thinking about that will help people be efficient with this time?
I think there's probably, I'm sure there are lots of different ways that people approach this, but the way I tend to think about it and talk to the teams that we work with about it is trying to spend, you know, when we talk about that kind of huge investment that you make in content, thinking about, if you look at your kind of plan, think about your main pillars of content. When you look at your content strategy, you've got those kind of like top level pillars. Think about for each of those, what are you going to really invest in to create that like flagship bit of content? Because that, in some cases, that might be like a really meaty report or white paper or something that does actually genuinely take quite a bit of effort to create. It might involve some data collection, some analysis, and, you know, real opinion generation. Think about your kind of big building blocks of content, if you like. What are the big things you want to talk about and the big messages you want to get out that align with those different pillars? And then essentially all of your repurposing should kind of like fall under that. And so that's really the layer I think you should really invest your time in developing content ideas around, versus what I see happen most commonly is you kind of get hyper focus on a pillar and go right down to like, right, I need to think of 20 social media posts that cover this topic to get me through the next month or two. so I always think it's like flip that on its head and just think about your big rocks, if you like, of content you're going to talk about, and then let the small stuff fall out once you've got those bigger pieces, because really those small pebbly bits that you pepper through everything should be the offcuts of that big bit of thinking, and you only really want to invest your time in, you know, a small number of those big meaty bits of content that you create. And then once you've kind of got that top level structure right, these are my big rocks to think about where we're going to invest our time creating content, then think about your channel distribution strategy. So what are the main platforms, channels you think you want to invest time in distributing content to? And that might involve there being a couple that you feel pretty confident about, that are tried and tested, that you've been using already and you know work, so you're continuing investment. And it might mean adding a couple in that you think are worth experimenting with or trying. And then think about your repurposing plan then from the beginning of like, okay, how am I going to translate, like roughly speaking, kind of back of fag packet kind of thinking of like, how am I going to get that report across all of these channels? Just so you've got, you know, it's nice to feel prepared, right? That you know that you're going to try some video, you're going to try SEO optimized stuff, and then you can think about what tools and processes you need in place to help execute that. So as you're actually going through it and delivering, you don't get to that point where like, oh my gosh, I've now got to get this all sounded great in my head of turning this report into these 8 pieces of content, but I don't actually know how to get from A to B. And in some cases that will be really obvious. And so, but actually I don't think until you sit down and really think about it that you really realize the work involved, and you need to plan that. Like, that's, you know, it's, even though again we're talking about efficiency, we're still talking about investing a bit of time in all of that repurposing to make sure it's right. So then once you know your kind of big chunks of content, you know your channels, then you think about your workflows and how you're going to get there. So that will be looking at what tools do I need. So if you're doing video to written, how are you going to transcribe that? You know, this is where all of these brilliant AI tools that are popping up left, right, and center are making this bit so easy, or so much easier than it ever was, because you've got a dozen that will translate well into transcripts for you, you know, whether that's Otter AI or any of the others that people are using. There's like Opus Clip that can help you go from like a long video into short clips. And, you know, Claude is a great one as well for going, here's a big bit of content, can you help me come up with 10 different posts off the back of it, that just give you that starting point. And again, it's not about copying and pasting out of that tool back into the world, but it's about making that process nice and quick for yourself so that you can spend your time on the hard bit of thinking, not the kind of quick iteration stuff. And then ultimately from there, it's about tracking and optimizing, right? Again, what's really working, what's worth continuing to invest in versus what's worth actually, do you know what, we've done that. We've tried doing the podcast audio only stuff for a while and we're not really getting any traction, so let's drop that now and let's look at where else we might experiment with. And so just making sure that your distribution list, you're always kind of looking at that again critically of like, are these the right places? Do we need to actually optimize this and stop doing some of them and look at other opportunities?
Yeah, that's so right. And be structured about that experimenting as well. So it doesn't just become, oh, I'll try it one day, or that didn't work. It's got to be about the consistency and build and starting small and growing.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think out of anything, I mean, you gave a really good few examples of the AI tools. And especially when you're putting the transcript into a Claude or a ChatGPT and asking it to help come up with ideas, it's really helping you go from that sort of blank page of sort of, I don't know where to start, to here's something for me to manage and to build on and get ideas from. It's almost like having that extra person in the room talking to you about those ideas, rather than that being just a cut and paste job onto your social. So useful. It definitely helps me. So getting started, how would you go about it if, you know, you're talking to somebody that's very inconsistent with their marketing content, that has done the odd white paper or perhaps, you know, the odd interview series, but really hasn't made the most of them? Where should they begin?
So I think, as with all of these things, there's a temptation to come like charging in and bite off more than you can chew. Like there's, especially when we're talking about content, it's quite easy to get, well, I've personally quite easy to get overwhelmed with having too many things going on at once. So I definitely think it's one of these things where you start small and kind of build up your almost confidence, I suppose, in terms of doing it, and see for yourself the value that it can create. So I'm sure there'll be, for most people, there will be something, some sort of asset, content asset, that over the last kind of 6 months or so that has performed well to some degree. And obviously that definition is going to vary for everyone, whether it's a blog that's brought in lots of organic traffic, or whether it's a report they produced that did really well and got PR and all the rest of it. Find something that has done well in the past and just try that first bit of experimentation with, this thing worked really well. Here's 5 other, let's say 5 other channels that I know we should be on utilizing and where our audience are, and start doing that translation piece of like, right, how do I turn this into the right bit of content for that platform? And just try and repeat that process a few times, so that you kind of start to build up a bit of understanding of how well those channels are going to perform for you. Because like you said before, it's not going to happen overnight. You're not going to post it once on YouTube and suddenly you're an influencer. It's about, as much as anything, it's also going to be about consistency. So none of this is going to be an absolute rip-roaring overnight success, but just getting into the process, I think, is often the hardest part for people, and getting into the right disciplines of doing this well, and building the right behaviors around it. So go and dig through everything you've already done before, pull out a list of things that you think have performed well and that haven't really probably been well utilized yet, and kind of like then map them to about 5 other channels that you think are worth proliferating across, and just do that for a while and look at what's working and what isn't. And then you might want to change that list of 5 channels to tweak it and adapt it, and then just build that into your ongoing process for new content as it comes out. The other thing I think is, the other tip I would say as well, is what we're doing here is looking at the big bit of content like down almost. And there is another way you can do it as well, which is slightly more tactical, where you might take a bottom-up approach in terms of, say, for example, you post something on LinkedIn that really takes off and you spark a really good conversation. You've obviously hit on a topic or subject matter people are really engaged in. You could almost do the inverse of going, okay, that's interesting, let's now go turn that into longer form, meatier content. So that could be another way of just kind of getting yourself into a rhythm with it, if you don't feel like you've got necessarily lots of big meaty bits to work with yet. If you're seeing some kind of threads of success in your kind of more day-to-day LinkedIn activity, for example, you could use that as a kind of a way to then repurpose upwards.
That's brilliant advice. Thank you so much. I'd love to hear from other people if we've answered their sort of worries about it, or if they have any other questions when they're just getting started. And also what brands you think are doing this well. I think, as marketers, we're constantly reviewing other people's content. So it'd be great to hear from that as well, so we can add some of those examples in. But thank you very much, Ness. This has been brilliant. Our resident expert.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.